This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Pooka. Say hi, Pooka.
George.
What are we talking about tonight, Pooka?
We are going around the world, or kind of, as we go through Chapter 3 of the Changeling 20th Anniversary Edition Player's Guide, which covers the world, kind of.
Pieces of the world, in various different parts of the world
Fragments.
that are far apart from each other. So
Yes, disparate dreams.
Yep.
And it is quite a chapter. I mean, this is like a full third of the book.
Yeah, and at the same time, we'll get into the details, but like, really, each section of this chapter should have been a book. But
Yeah.
what it was trying to cover, and then needed more sections than they had. But
This is definitely a case of a very expansive brief, and rather than having lots of dense... I mean, it is dense text, and yet somehow it seems to scratch any kind of surface.
Yeah, I think there's just too much surface. But we'll get into other discussions of it beyond just that, too. It's not simply too brief.
I think maybe we need to start off with giving some context for why this chapter exists. So, I mean, anyone who's played the game for a while, or anyone who's been listening to the podcast for the last couple of seasons has heard us harp about this probably. But so Changeling, through its history, has often had these accusations of racism, insensitivity, and or cultural appropriation levied at it. And I know that we've said, okay, well, first, it was the 90s and they were 20-somethings in Atlanta. Second, if you compare it with what the rest of the RPG landscape was doing at the time, White Wolf was likely not the worst offender. And then, because of wider access to information and the world we live in, we're just kind of more aware of those issues now. And that doesn't mean we should accept that Eurocentric focus of the original game. But, you know, its flaws were out of ignorance rather than malice.
And not even Eurocentric, like...
Western-centric.
American-centric.
Yeah. Euro-Anglo-American-centric.
Yep.
But often I think people conflate the ignorance and the malice piece. And ignorance, I think, can present an opportunity for dialogue, correction, and growth and moving forward. The latter just kind of leads to screaming matches.
Yeah.
But plenty of the people in the fandom, as we've said before, came up with their own homebrew. Like, there were hundreds probably of kiths out there being shared online by people who were knowledgeable about these cultures and wanted to represent their lore. So there was also a lot of garbage, to be fair.
Yeah. And now we get some more kiths.
Yeah, 22 more kiths in this. 23 if you count the Thalane sidebar.
And this, I don't know, I don't think we ever got officially told who wrote what, but it's definitely not all written by one person. It's definitely written with different levels of lots of things. So
even within the same section, I would say.
Yeah.
And to any of the sort of criticisms of, well, why didn't they hire freelancers who were knowledgeable? I think that assumes a lot about the shape and appeal of freelance work, which I've come to learn about. So,
well, I think that's like the freelance rates that was paid for this. I think that would actually be
insulting.
Racist.
Yeah. I mean, maybe. Yeah. I don't want to go into, I don't know enough about the business practices to dive into it. But
the per word for this is similar to what Lovecraft was getting paid per word without adjusting for inflation. Ago. Yeah. And it was considered low pay then. So.
Well, yeah. I just also want to note, in terms of the game saying you have to play with these kiths, I think that idea is inconsistent as best. Like, they are the kiths that are presented, but there's always the golden rule. There's always there's the kith construction kit now. There's always these options.
They talk about that. So let's get into this chapter with talking about that, where they actually say things about this topic.
Yes.
Yeah, starting with old dreams and new.
I actually like the idea here that sort of the dreaming ebbs and flows between the most ancient and the most modern. And like, these ancient ideas can still bubble up into the modern dreaming. And they
Yeah.
highlight here that Kithane and Galain can end up anywhere. But the emphasis in this chapter, and I guess this book, I wouldn't go so far as to say all of C20, but certainly in this book, is that Kithane are Western writ large and Galain are non-Western writ large. And I'm not sure how I feel about that.
I mean,
It's inconsistent, but that's
yeah,
in the
this
introduction.
chapter is also, well, it's saying Kithane and Galain. What counts? I mean, this doesn't get into what counts as Kithane really, or what Galain. And the core book does say it's basically depends on which. I mean, there's Kithane, but like Nunahi, they wouldn't say the word Galain to describe the Kithane, but it's sort of the same idea of how they would think of them.
There's a note here on page 72 that suggests the requirement for, if the requirement, it says, for being Galain is having a fraction of indigenous DNA, the storyteller should simply assume all characters do, no matter their outward ethnicity. And it also says, being Galain assumes a buy-in into the culture from both the player and the character. And I read into that this implication of like, it's less a matter of birthright and more a matter of knowledge and connection to the
Yeah,
lore and the culture in question.
Kiths are, I'm not talking about Kithane. Fae are a cultural construct, as in they were
Whoa.
made by, yeah, in setting even. Um,
Galleon is all relative, man.
yeah,
But it is. I mean, it is. So
yeah, and it talks about this nobility of many names. I don't like that as much, but we'll get into.
to your point last episode, this is the bit where it's like the suggestion, oh, banner houses are just houses in other parts of the world.
Yeah, well, they get into this. This is inconsistently done within the different places in the world too, in a
Yeah.
confusing way. But oh, and it says like these are only supposed to be a small. If you can dream it, these are only like a small piece,
Mm-hmm.
and for like all these areas and more, and other areas not covered, like don't assume that this is the complete by any stretch.
Yeah. I all right. I need to get on my soapbox for just a minute here.
Yeah.
I'm iffy about the guidance here. And this extends into the next piece where it talks about like their approach to writing this.
Yeah.
The guidance, if I had to distill it, I would say the guidance is that anyone can play anything so long as they do their research on the culture. And I'm concerned by that because I don't want to forbid people from playing what they want to play, but
Yeah.
this is not nearly enough.
Oh yeah.
It's not nearly enough guidance to get people to do proper due diligence, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I don't think we've ever had enough guidance
No,
in
but I
Changeling.
think people think this is enough, and it's not. So,
Yeah. Well, I think it also depends. Like, are who's at your table? Is
absolutely.
this going to be? There's different things where everyone at your like you're playing with people you know, and you've done the due diligence of the cultures of everyone at the table,
Yeah, for sure.
versus you're going to do a streaming thing for the whole world. Like that has different requirements, I think.
And even just like a play by post game, an open world
Yeah.
game on a server, like you don't know who you're going to be engaging with and
Yeah.
how they will perceive your take on what you're playing. I wrote down 3 sort of like bullet points here where, aside from discussing these things frankly at the table, which you should do,
Hmm.
I would encourage players to ask themselves first, what Changeling the Dreaming specific stories can you tell with this kith you want to play that you couldn't with one of the existing ones? Second, what is your identity in relation to the culture that kith is from? And third, what's the history that you need to take into account? Especially important in light of historical injustices. I know that like I as a white person would not feel comfortable playing certain kiths, and that's kind of why I get
Yeah.
frustrated by their take here.
But at the same time, like I think there's in our hobby in the fandom or whatever of changing whatever, there's too much of a distinction between PCs and NPCs.
Mm,
So I think it gets more complicated than even you're suggesting because you still have to do this for as a storyteller with NPCs. And with NPCs, depending on where the game is set, who you choose not to have as NPCs is also can be a problem.
for sure.
So, like, if you're playing where I live, you need to have Nune or something, or that culture, like various cultures that would be indigenous. Plus, not just Nune, but like you live in a city. Like, there's a lot of people here from all over the world who've their cultures. Like, people have moved here from various parts, not just Europe. If they're not from this area, like they could
Hmm.
be from all over. And there should be Fae from all those places. And you can't just pretend they don't exist. because you're worried about the research or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the points that I'm listing, I'm distilling into sound bites for this episode. I, of course,
Yeah.
think it's a much more involved
Yeah.
process.
But I think that's very
So,
important. Like, don't just who you choose to play as your player character. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you
yeah.
100% on that. But as a storyteller, it doesn't get you it out. I don't think.
And that kind of ties into kind of the overarching question that I have for this chapter, because I'm treating it as we do with other books, like
Hmm.
what's the purpose of this chapter and does it meet it? I was asking myself, like, what and who is this chapter for? Because I
Yep.
think it's not exactly as clear as people think it is, or it seems to be.
Yeah. Like, and I think each section might be for different people.
Yeah. I definitely think it's more useful for storytellers than players.
Oh yeah, this should not be
So
a well. No, except it is for player. Like it's.
it says it's for players, but I don't think it's
I think it. These are all, with maybe the exception of the Australia section. It's meant for players. Whether or not they did a good enough job,
exactly.
but the
Yes.
purpose is for players
Yeah.
for sure.
I
Uh,
don't know that it
well, I'm not sure that. I'm also not sure this the core book is either in the core kits.
fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So we get a note from your guides, and it's making this claim about this chapter that it's talking about we're not viewing these cultures as just based around their tragedy or based around bad things that happen to them, but they're like full cultures with history and laughter and all that. We'll get into whether or not they do that in each section,
Yeah. Inconsistent again is
but that
my
is their
word.
that is what they say they're doing. So,
Yeah.
and I think that's a laudable goal. But let's,
It's a laudable goal. The approach they take here is not the one that works, because what they
yeah.
do is excise most to all of the history of the cultures in question.
Well, they say they're going to do that.
Yeah,
I don't think they follow through with what they say they're doing. So,
well, just I mean the discourse around this that has existed in the fandom, I'm just like I'll just say this about the individual kits in particular. I don't have any direct connection to the cultures explored here, but I feel like we've heard over the last few years as many complaints about these new kits from knowledgeable people as we've heard praises about their inclusion.
mm-hmm.
And that I think is very telling. Like,
Yep.
fundamentally, these are kits created in accordance with mechanical principles to be played by players. And if cultural consultation took place on them at all, beyond just on Wikipedia, I don't know, it's not clear to me how much weight that had in the final product.
Yeah. Well, first, before we get into the kits, they also have like a big setting description, and I think that's, to my eyes, that's almost like a bigger
Yeah.
problem with their setting descriptions than the actual kith write up.
Why don't we talk about the first one of those?
Yeah. Land of Ancient Dreams, which is all of Africa.
Yeah.
And they do address that they sort of, like it says, it's the four kingdoms. We're following four kingdoms. No means the only four changeling territories, land of ancient dreams. Rather, they're just sort of giving pieces. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what you'd have to do with the length of word count they have here. You can't.
Yeah, there's I mean, we could talk about what they left out, but
Yeah.
it smacks a little bit of like the darkest continent discourse to me, like the sort
Okay.
of cringy historical stuff, especially that art on page 74.
Oh, the art. The art for this section is really bad. Really bad in that way. The text I don't think is quite as bad as the art.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I was not wild about this.
yeah, I thought at first, like the first bit when they're just generically talking about Africa, was the actual words were fine.
Yeah. I liked the notes that the dreaming there is more vibrant than most continents due to that mix of deep history and lively modernity. I'm like, okay, yeah, that works for me.
Yep.
The bit about how it's filled with these sort of hotly contested trods, many of the powerful ones of which have recently reopened, like since the Shattering, and how Fae from around the world are rushing to explore them, including the phrase, the race is on. I'm thinking like
Yeah, that
any
was.
historical detail about the scramble for Africa and why that was a problem would have given that more urgency, and
Yeah.
it's not there.
That
Like,
sidebar where that is, that one paragraph really was not good.
right. And like that's the kind of historical context that I don't think you need to avoid mentioning entirely in order to give it weight. Like I fully
Mhm.
understand not wanting to trigger readers or delve into things that you feel uneasy about exploring, but it is fundamental to understanding the kind of picture they're
Yeah.
painting.
Well, and then once they get into the specifics, they do dive into it, which is just
Off and on. Some of
yeah,
them do.
yeah. But anyway, okay, we'll get into
Yeah, so let's start with Empire of the Sphinx.
yeah. So this is about Egypt.
Is it?
Well, it says it's about Egypt.
It is set in Egypt. I'll give it
Yeah,
that. I think what it's about is a person and her freehold. So
yeah. And then it's like under a thing. Yeah, she's like very old Sphinx lady.
yeah, I mean, she's a great character. Like, I love the mystery of
Yeah,
whether she's immortal or not. She's got this like autocratic thing going on. She bans all British fae. Like, she's an interesting character, and her court is described interestingly.
yeah,
But Egypt is a place with 5,000 years of history to draw on, and none of it is here. There's like, oh, by the way, there are mummies. Oh, by the way, there are
yeah,
pyramids. And it's,
yeah. They mentioned the existence of Cairo. There we go.
yeah, they also got the date of its foundation wrong, which.
Oh, right. Also, like putting this in that. Okay, it is in Africa,
Yeah.
right? But then they break down like kiths and stuff, and it's an odd
Yeah.
choice, I think.
They do mention colonialism through the sort of archaeological plundering by Britain,
Mm-hmm.
and they mention Tahrir Square in 2011
Yeah,
without any follow up of like the decade between then and when this book came out. And it makes me think like those are the two particular issues the writer knew and cared about,
yeah,
because there's no other like historical specificity. And it's like, how do you not mention ancient Egypt or Islam at all in this entire write up?
yeah,
But I'm glad there's a link to mummy. I mean, more mummy representation is cool.
yeah. And they hint maybe the Empress is a mummy, or Fey mummy.
Yeah. The sidebar about what the dreaming is like there, which is a recurring thing. They're uneven, but I do like how there are these little paragraphs about here's what the dreaming feels like
Mm-hmm.
in this place. I think that's a nice touch.
Oh, and they talk about the Great Maelstrom, sixth Great Maelstrom dying out. I'm like, oh, so C20 is keeping the Great Maelstrom, but not the Week of Nightmares.
There you
Which
go.
is,
Gotta have that new generation of mummies.
yep.
Then we move on to the Kingdom of Nubia.
Which it guess is getting lumped in with Empire of the Sphinx. Which
No, it's separate. It's the
oh,
southern neighbor.
oh, they say there's 4 kingdoms though.
Yeah, Sphinx, Nubia, Cradle of Empires, Realm of
Yeah.
Seasons.
Okay, yeah, okay. This one,
Yeah.
they didn't. It's like they somehow gave less than Egypt to God.
Well, we're told how amazingly ancient and rich with dreams it is, even more so than Egypt, but
Yeah.
that we're just kind of told that. Like, it's a lovely paragraph to open with, and then,
Yep.
okay, then we get another character.
And they said,
Like,
oh, there's been long interactions with the Empire of the Sphinx. Yes, there has been. That region and Egypt have had long interactions for a very long time.
yeah.
But, okay.
And the sidebar in the dreaming for this one is one that I do not like, because I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's colorful. Oh, there are stories here. Well, no kidding. It's the dreaming.
No, it says hot and dry climate. But it's not all hot and dry. Parts of it is. It's got freaking lots of other stuff, too. And
I mean,
yeah.
the fact that there's a history of warrior queens that's been disrupted, nice touch. Though
Yep.
I'm not sure what the rebuking intruders piece is about. The fact that there's this prophetic king and he's kind of welcoming travelers who have been denied by the sort of xenophobic Empire of the Sphinx. Cool, nice political angle. I don't really know what to do with that except to include it as a story hook in a globetrotting story that is prepackaged that I can't expand on. And I do wonder if any of this could have been like repurposed from Keys to the Kingdom or something, because that did have a
Yeah, I think, and there's that thing I mentioned there with the connection to Mummy. Oh, there's something else that I saw Keys to the Kingdom connection.
the Amazon one, maybe.
Oh, the unblinking eye.
Oh yeah, I liked that though.
Yeah, but that was very much that's later. But yeah, that felt Keys to the Kingdom.
One other thing about this section in particular, I think I'd be willing to accept more of it if the geography didn't bug me. So they mention like, oh, it once spanned from Aswan to Khartoum, and I'm like, that is not that much compared with like what, because then they're like modern Sudan and parts of Ethiopia,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking that is much larger of an area.
Do you know what they left out? So while this book was being written,
Yeah.
There was a dam being built
Yes.
that was talked about, like in Ethiopia was building a dam. It was finished in 2020. Now they're filling it up. It's been this source of serious conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt that like
And Sudan.
is sort of one of those like could spill over into war easily kind of things, and still is like that. But it was definitely, even if anything, more contentious while this book was being written. Nothing about it.
Yeah. I really hope this isn't the case. I don't think it is, but it's kind of unclear. There's not enough information to know one way or the other. It almost reads as though it could have been written by somebody who specifically avoided doing research. Like kind of to that point in the introduction to the chapter about we're not going to delve into this, et cetera, et cetera.
But that doesn't mean you should, just because you're not going to, what you choose to focus on is very different from what you choose to learn about.
Exactly. Like, and that's the issue.
Yeah, like this, we said before, okay, it's the mid-90s, you're in Atlanta, you don't have...
There's no excuse
This book
anymore.
was not written into that context, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could have read the Wikipedia entries on the countries they were writing about first.
I mean, I did, just to check some of this.
Yeah.
Which is how I learned for the next one, The Cradle of Empires, and they talk about the fallen Emperor Issa Traoré, and I'm like, oh, the filmmaker from Mali who passed away in 2009? Or 2003, maybe. But that was on Wikipedia. So, anyway, speaking of that next one, yeah, so we had Egypt, and really it's just the Nile Delta. Then we had Sudan, but really it's just kind of the northern central stretch of the Nile in Sudan. And now we have all of West Africa kind of
is it all of
together.
West Africa? What was the area supposed to... I thought it was way smaller than that.
It says West Africa. It goes from Dakar to Lagos. So
yeah. It has one line that just... They say Timbuktu is nearly abandoned in like a ghost town. I'm like, that's not... 2023, there was like a military thing and like a siege and a bunch of people evacuated, but that was before this book was written. It's not a ghost town.
There were other uprisings and evacuations before that.
But they don't mention that either.
Yeah.
Like it they make it seem like people just stop going there. I'm like, no, that it's still a important center for the area where it is. Nothing about what was his name? The richest guy ever?
Mansa Musa?
Yeah, nothing about him.
Yeah.
That should be relevant.
Nothing about Ibn Battuta, the best issue who ever lived.
Yeah, I forgot. I didn't clue in just how big an area they're supposed to make this. This is not. Yeah. This is too much. They should have made a little, like half a real world country. That would have been.
Yeah. Specifically, it doesn't include North Africa, which I think means we don't have any information about, because I don't think that's included in any of the other...
Except for Egypt.
Yeah. But it's described in very flowery terms without a lot of detail. I wanted to hear about, like, what about the Nigerian funk scene, you know? Like,
yeah, and the art, another...
And the art, and, like, so much. And they talk about, in particular, in the introduction, they're like, oh, there's thousands of languages, thousands of cultures. This is where the thousands of languages are, and there's, like, no mention of that.
Yeah.
But that's linguist me being aggravated. I also want to point out there's this line where they say the withering glamour of the evanescence. And
yeah, I saw that too. I'm like, what?
More than once it's in there.
Yeah.
So is that supposed to be the event, the evanescence, was an explosion of dark glamour, but the era, the evanescence, because we've seen both, is supposed to be...
Oh.
But it sounds like banality to say the withering glamour.
Also, I should note here, they threw in some more ethnic slurs in the White Wolf tradition without realizing it.
Oh, no.
You can find anthropology papers, especially older ones, using these terms, yes.
I'm afraid to ask. Can you point me to just like a page number?
Let me just look.
I'm curious.
I'll just type it in the chat here.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, just be careful with your... Don't trust anything in here if you're using it in your games.
Yep. But I like the Eye of the Sahara. I'll admit that.
Yeah, they mention the Mali Empire. They don't mention any Mali emperors.
Yeah, well, the fact that there is no current emperor means there's no storyteller character to do all the writing on. So, like, it does actually have some room for talking about the demographics, the traditions, interesting sites, the kind of streetscapes. I do like that that's there. I'm just kind of... I raise an eyebrow at collapsing all of West Africa into a single realm, because that to me feels like virtue signaling.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Yep, that is too big. Yeah.
I guess that was supposed to be like a story hook, like maybe your character could be the next emperor, but...
Oh, they can have empires much smaller and still be big empires. So
yeah. The Realm of Seasons. Southern
Yeah, sorry,
Africa.
this is where the slur is.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of Southern Africa, all of Western Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a weird. If you just look at a map, it doesn't even make sense.
They also call it a living history of migration, and that's a phrase that I don't know what it's supposed to mean.
No, and I'm also like I'm still not 100% sure actually where the Southern Africa and Western Africa did they actually specify the difference.
Well, so Realm of Seasons, I think, is supposed to cover South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Lesotho, maybe a couple areas around. The Cradle of
Yeah.
Empires seems to extend about to like Cameroon, the Bend, because we don't get anything on Central Africa or East Africa.
Oh, okay. Well, East Africa, I guess, would be the
Well, we don't get Kenya, we don't get Somalia, we don't get Tanzania.
yeah. You don't get DRC. We don't get
Yeah. But the Realm of Seasons, yeah, living history of migration, and I'm thinking, well, where isn't?
Oh, and the whole bit about like their depiction of these groups. These are not tribes. Some of these are big groupings, and some of these are like completely separate groups that like white people group together.
Hmm. They also just kind of describe linguistics. Like,
Yeah,
the languages became unintelligible to each other. I'm like, that's what languages do.
but like when they say when they talk about Bantu, when did the
Bantu migration was like a few thousand years ago.
yeah, it is like saying when they covered like Isle of the Mighty, that didn't talk about the wave of Indo-European speakers.
Right. Exactly, yeah. I mean, I assume it's because they want to highlight just how much diversity there is packed into Africa, which, again, admirable.
But they kind of made it seem way less diverse than it actually is.
Yeah. The thing with the Bantu languages is that there is a lot of commonality between them, and there's so much more linguistic diversity in West Africa that goes entirely unmentioned, which is interesting.
Yeah, but like again, talking about like some of the pre-Bantu peoples,
yeah,
grouping them together, they're not. Some of these language families, completely distinct language families, they group under one tribe, are very different, not related by any reasonable way of doing any kind of even the kooky reconstructionists don't try to reconstruct it really.
See my forthcoming title, World of Darkness Linguistics, available on the Storyteller Vault in the near future. So, for more changeling notes, the importance of seasonal rule is emphasized here, as is the reflection of each ruler on their constituent land, because it's like there's a bunch of rulers, and then there's a first among many, currently Kutuano Mamelo, King of High Snows, who rules from Letusu, which is a typo that makes me sigh. As in the last section, I was glad to see more emphasis on the actual geography with some interesting ideas, like having floral in anime, having a Bastet Queen, talking about the Okavango Delta. Cool. All of that's cool. The fast and looseness about the cradle of humankind really bothers me, though, because it's not the name for the region. It's a small collection of UNESCO sites.
Yeah.
They don't go back 10 million years, because that would be before what is recognized as human speciation. And it is
that was still including like bonobos and chimps. Yeah.
And that was one of the freeholds in Book of Freeholds too, right? That was like one of the most powerful things. So I don't know who put that in twice, and it's also on the other side of South Africa from the other part they're talking about here, the Makwa land. But anyway, then we get to the kiths.
So, okay, there's a lot of kiths that are problematic in general, but also in this chapter. I find this one, though, to be the worst.
Should we just kind of give brief overviews of what they're about?
Yeah.
I did what background research I could in the time between work tasks today. So I have a sense, I think, of which ones are kind of more or less on point, at least, putting aside how cringe they are.
Yep.
So there's the Biloko. They are a young kith, we're told, that keeps traditions alive, especially between communities and the land. They're living embodiments of their people's beliefs. They're just kind of general catch-all African kith, which is
I find this the most cringe of all the kiths here in that sense. Like this is not what I would even think about trying to like save or change or fix or talk to anyone in the I wouldn't even bother talking to someone in this culture about this because which culture?
So in the DRC, I looked it up. They are vicious dwarves who live in the deepest part of the rainforest and have grass instead of hair or something.
That's nothing to
nothing to do with this at all. Then we have the Okubili, who are all about duality and balance and a middle path between values. They are versatile with warrior roots. They maintain separate lives between, I guess, their fae side and their human side, or their
Mm-hmm.
different professions or whatever. They have strong spirits. They make good teachers. Again, a sort of very just generic feeling kith.
Yeah.
Hilariously, there's an Onyx Path forum note from someone who has homebrewed lots and lots of kiths, including African kiths, who said they could find absolutely no folkloric basis
Yeah.
for this kith at all.
This one at least is less obviously terrible to read it without knowing
Well,
any
because
context.
it's not drawn from an actual
No,
being.
but it's also not pretending to just be like the basic concept of the Boloko was just cringe. Like it was not.
Yeah.
This could actually, I could imagine there's folklore behind this one. I know there isn't, but
To me, it seems like the folklore behind this is fairies. You know what I
yeah,
mean? The name is just the word for two in Zulu, or double.
yeah,
So then we get the Jedi, who are city dwellers and natural magicians. They love showing off, especially for mortals. They're kind of like jesters with a strong sense of individual style and cinematic
hmm
unleashings. I do like how they have a sort of like auto magic birthright, but two
yeah.
frailties. And their name is drawn from the legendary ancient Egyptian sorcerer who could sever and reattach heads.
Hey, that kind of fits-ish.
Kind of fits.
Yeah.
I think the next one, and again, I'm by no means an expert, but on
hmm
the surface at least, I think the next one folklorically has a connection.
Yep.
So the Quino, they're always ready for a deal, and they have a reputation for avarice. They're born from dreams of better lives through raw materials, I guess. They
Yep.
organize themselves as the capital C company, and they are pragmatic networkers with two sets of eyes.
Yep.
But their frailty, where they have the sambio, the treasured possession that houses a portion of their fae spirit like a phylactery, from what I was able to
Yep.
find, that is actually a piece of the folklore.
And that's, I think these are also like, okay, the previous one also, but this one, like, this is interesting. Like,
Yeah.
you can make interesting plots around this. Like,
Yeah. Lastly, we get the Obambo, who are born from ghost stories and relic thieving. They're collectors who prefer fieldwork to study. They have a sort of animism around their trinkets. They're rugged, secretive, and vengeful. I really like their one false move birthright. I think that's fun.
mm-hmm.
But they're drawn from the lore of evil spirits who cause illness.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because with that folklore and with their description, their frailty doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
fit very well. But
Shrug.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
felt like a bunch of ideas, mainly character ones. No historical, cultural, or social framework. North, Central, and East Africa completely unrepresented. Generic kiths, some of which are cringe. Yeah.
yeah. And now it gets worse.
Let's start with the problem that Central America is still unaccounted for, and yet deeply tied into the last several centuries of history.
Yeah, I mean, okay, they could have thrown another paragraph saying, well, I mean, there's a lot of places not accounted
That's
for.
true.
They've said that, like they can't. There's also Indonesia and the other islands.
Oh, well, yeah, I've got something to say about that later.
There's
But
still basically no India.
yeah,
The East Asia thing's still a mess. Like it's
yeah. But I just mean, I think it's kind of reflective. We've talked before about how it's weird that, like, the political boundaries of Concordia, for example, follow state lines.
yeah,
It's weird to me that this section, that it seems to, like, end at the border of Colombia. Like,
yeah.
anyway. And this section does not say, oh, these are just three of many kingdoms. It's like, these are the three
No,
kingdoms.
which is
So,
just what, and it even says like it covers all these countries. It also reads like a bad early werewolf supplement to me.
well, it says comprised of over a dozen human countries. There are 12 countries and one territory in South America. So, which are the others?
Well, that's over a dozen.
Right. So, is the 13th French Guiana? I don't know. Doesn't seem to be Panama, but who knows?
Yep.
Anyway, the broad notes we get here, just some of the writing, they're like, the dreams go back to before the dawn of time. And I'm thinking, do they? We do get an actual paragraph about colonialism and bits about modern concerns. So I was relieved that that was at least mentioned.
Yeah.
Lots of
I
sentence
think
fragments.
I think this thing says that all the Fae in South America were opposed to like the indigenous people doing anything bad to nature too, and then when the Europeans showed up, it was even worse. I think it's saying that in the history.
Your guess is as good as mine. My sense was that the
Yeah.
Fae of the continent are like only just now emerging from self-imposed isolation.
Yeah, but we're talking about the early history before the isolation thing.
Yeah, yeah. Would you say these are supposed to be the kits are supposed to be considered like Nunyehi type in the sense of are they integrated into human culture or are they like first edition Nunyehi who aren't given any kind of connections except for like isolated villages?
Both.
All right.
If you read the actual descriptions, it doesn't really clarify.
They also use terms like Shiachain, which I think of as a Kithane term, but
Yeah. So to give the history, which they had something like after they do bring up a lot of the horrible stuff, right?
some.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely not avoiding it like they said they
Yeah.
would. But they had this Treaty of Sierra Madre where the three kingdoms of South America got together and made a giant barrier so that no Fae can get in or out for 500 years. Okay, that's a terrible plot.
Yeah.
Like that's just not, putting aside any concerns of cultural sensitivity or what. That's just bad. Like don't do that in your story. Like it doesn't help anything. It doesn't add to cultural sensitivity by any stretch, but it also doesn't help, and it's not.
Also, why would they have been using Spanish and Portuguese at the time that the Europeans were arriving?
Yeah.
That's my question. But they're like, oh, the mountain mother was called La Madre Monte. I'm like, no, she wasn't.
Yeah.
Not that long ago, she wasn't. Not
Yeah.
millennia ago.
And they're also like, oh, they're also make it seem like this is the area with like South America, also Central America, like you said, like all the way up through Mexico City and things like, or even above that. You had actually like really advanced technology
Yeah.
and writing and literature. None of that. They're like werewolf eco terrorists. All the Fae.
The word Inca does not appear once,
Yeah, or
which
Olmec,
really bothered
or
me. Nor does the word Mapuche, nor,
yeah.
So, yeah.
It also Brazil. A lot of changeling fans in Brazil.
Yeah.
No, not supposed to have any Kithane there, I guess, even though there's lots of different culture mixing in that are.
Well, so a lot of this is subsumed into the Kingdom of Mountains. And by the way, we don't get like firm borders or anything. It's just,
Yeah.
I guess it's the Andes, so the entire western spine of the
Yeah.
continent. And you have this kind of creation myth of Cuyana / La Madre Monte, who created the flora and the fauna and the features. But then you have like, they reference Llorona, which is Mexican, which is also in Spanish. They also have gremlins as Kithane, and I'm like, I don't remember that Kith. But then you have the Treaty of Sierra Madre in Spanish, which was upheld by Oscar Lluís, which is Portuguese. So like, what's
Yeah.
going on
And
here?
I was really confused by this Vanessa Novak.
She must have been somebody's
I don't even
character.
understand. I'm trying to read. I read over these paragraphs about her several times, and I did not understand what they were saying. Like, I just couldn't follow it. Like, it was confusing.
She's a Kithane savior.
Yeah.
She's a random issue novelist who got into the continent, and now when the wards are lowered for 1 month per year, she's like their link to the outside world. So
Oh, she came in when it lowered
yeah,
and then went back up.
and now goes back and forth.
But it made it seem like she was trapped there like way more than a year.
Yeah, the chronology is very weird. As are the pronouns.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, it's very, and I just that character, I'm like, this is problematic because it's like here comes this Westerner who came down to the continent. Oh, but she's an issue. Oh well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was not a fan of her storyline that like, oh, here comes this one Concordian, I guess, who maybe?
I don't. Yeah, they don't say.
Anyway, now the Kingdom of Mountains is mostly still living in underground caves, but are globalizing, I guess.
Even though there's like, what about like there's a long coastline.
Yes.
There's all this other stuff.
There's a lot. There's a lot to work with.
Argentina. This covers like all of Argentina, right?
Presumably. I mean, if it's not the Amazon and it's not the Altiplano, then I guess it's part of this kingdom. So
yeah,
all the way from the top of Colombia down to Tierra del Fuego. So
yeah.
Anyway, then we get the Kingdom of Amazonia.
Yeah, this is someone read Rage Across the Amazon and went, let's make it less culturally sensitive.
Well, again, I wonder if this was from Keys to the Kingdom, because that was another location.
Yeah.
So we're told it was founded by Encantado 800 years ago and is still nominally ruled by their queen Camilla. But then there's this power behind the throne, Mateo Santos, the Sachamama, who demands sacrifice. But outside of their court, the Fae are reclusive occasionally living with isolated human groups. Very traditional.
Yeah, this does not read like Rio de Janeiro does not make sense in this
Yeah, and
description of a kingdom.
I don't think it's mentioned anywhere, is it? Like none of the cities of South America are mentioned at all.
Yep.
And I get that they're going for an indigenous forward approach, but as an outsider, I think that seems kind of disrespectful to the hundreds of millions of people who have made the most out of difficult historical roots to
Yeah.
create vibrant ethnicities and cultures. Like,
Yeah, including a whole bunch of Changeling fans.
Yeah.
Shout out to all of you Changeling fans
Yes.
in this area. We hear you.
I mean, and it's just inconsistently written. There's like, are there 10 guardians or are there 3? Are they immortal? Like, what's going on here? I don't know.
Yeah. And at one point, the guardians can't leave their kingdom. What?
But then the borders are...
Anyway, we got the Kingdom of Altiplano. I was a bit lost about where this is supposed to represent.
This is, I mean, mainly Bolivia.
Who looks at a map of South America and says, let's make 3 kingdoms, Bolivia, Brazil, and everything else?
Well, so, I mean, it is a discrete geographical area in the sense of it's like the Central Plateau. So I assume they just kind of did that. Which is, it's not the worst thing they could have done.
Yeah. Okay, if there were more kingdoms than the 3.
Yeah. So they go into... The creation myth they give for this kingdom does have kind of Inca vibes and also Fomorian ones for some reason.
Yep.
But they have this sort of dark world where mortals longed for light. You have the demigoddess Aravera giving birth to Inti, who eventually becomes the sun while she becomes the moon. There's Thalane, presumably called the Muki, who lurked in the tunnels of Ucopacha until they were released by mortals. It implies that colonial Kithane were allies of these mortals, but there weren't any Kithane, right? Because the continent was closed for 500 years. So,
yeah.
Anyway, yet another place where, I quote, humanity never quite lost touch with their magic and myths. Banality is apparently nearly absent, really. And there's very little on like what life in the kingdom is actually like. There's just some notes about the ruler, talks about the cultures, its landlocked position, the traditional healing and wisdom. And then weirdly, it kind of gets like, this is not written in character, but it's sort of in a voice. And then suddenly we get the note that, oh, there's regional variants on the kiths in the Changeling rulebook. It kind of gets even more out of character somehow. I don't know. So yeah.
Oh, and the near dreaming is always in a low valley? What?
With the mountains stretching up on either side of you, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, not great.
Yeah.
I guess let's talk about the kiths.
So the first kith is...
Alicanto.
Is this based on colonialism?
It's not. So, well, it might be...
But the first few sentences imply it.
It might be ultimately something that was born out of colonialism, but there is a mythological... It's a precious metal bird.
Yep.
And so these are a bird-like kith who are thieves and treasure hunters who love puzzles and crafting and art, and they're born from dreams of striking at rich mines. I actually kind of like them as a kith. I think they're the ones that have a solid idea at the core, but I can't speak to their accuracy. So, just as an aside too, one thing I do like about the way these write-ups are put together is that they have these glamour ways sections, and it's just like kind of a catch-all of what their glamour is like. And I do think that's a nice bit. So, anyway. Then we get the Boraro, who are fierce guardians of nature against colonization. They are dour and off-putting. They are primal and feral in their use of glamour. They fight against progress, which is weird phrasing to me, but okay.
Yeah.
And some rather limiting birthrights, to be honest. Like, they have to be touching soil to use them.
Yeah.
The folklore for these are the pale ones with backwards feet and huge genitals. They are also monstrous and evil. There's little bits of that. Then we have the Encantado, who are dolphin skin changers, whose reproduction raises interesting Selkie questions, I guess.
Yep.
They're graceful and charming. They love parties. 3 birthrights and 2 frailties. Holy cats. They come from Amazon lore. I don't know how accurate they are, but I feel like I've heard fans complain that they are not. So
yeah.
I think there's supposed to be a lot of kidnapping in the lore, but I don't know where I'm getting that from in my brain. Meh.
Yeah, so I don't know. These are like freshwater Selkies, but not...
Yeah, they go upriver. I like to think of them like cetacean ops from Star Trek Lower Decks.
The rumored to have been found as far north is like upstate New York, like the Catskills.
Yeah, but only recently because they were stuck behind those wards for 500 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So then next we get Llorona. She is a banshee-like figure who feeds symbiotically on grief, although there's not really any mechanic for that, I don't think. They're patient and brutally honest. They can be any gender, but have kind of an aged appearance, and they are weighed down by their ability to glimpse fate, especially dark fates. This is from a Mexican and ultimately Aztec legend. So,
yeah.
what's it doing here? Can't tell you.
Yep.
Lastly, we have Sachamama. They are giant snakes, languid and carefree, but attentive. I do like their description as stoop sitters, like they're these gossips.
I felt like the writer here lives in a city
Yeah.
and was thinking of some sort of like ethnic region. I can't even tell you which ethnicity, though, presumably somewhere in South America, right? And like was thinking of one or more specific women
Yeah.
that live in their neighborhood.
Or perhaps a stereotype of certain women.
Yeah.
Friendly but dangerous, some hefty birthright and frailty. The name comes from
Yep.
the Incan mother tree, who is sometimes represented as a snake with two heads.
Yeah, I think of them as like if you mix puka, satyrs, and redcaps.
With a person-eating snake.
Yep.
And those are the kiths. I don't know. I think I felt even more displaced in this section with regards to like how you're supposed to play these as changelings in terms of like the fae corresponding to the
Yeah.
mortal.
Well, especially it's supposed to, all the other fae route. You have these four kith and maybe some more that are completely not mentioned at all for an entire continent. Like that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Who else lives here? Like that's not enough for anyway. And they're all from different cultures. One of them's at least not even in South America. So.
And the sort of abridgment of history, like even though there's a couple of mentions, I feel like it might be most visible in this. Well, no, I take that.
Yeah.
And like
no, we can't say most.
The Africa section at least had dates, but
yeah, this and it was so focused on let's kill the bad people for it's like a Captain Planet level environmentalist, like the worst of the werewolf books is what it felt like.
Honestly, though, even though that is in here, it's not nearly as in here as much as I expected it would be, because it's like if you're going to go out of your way to avoid any kind of discussion of like the conflicts, the human conflicts, the social aspects that are going to be hard to figure out, fighting deforestation seems like a pretty straightforward and neutral enemy or like problem.
Yeah.
Like we've all seen Fern Gully.
I don't think they were trying to avoid it. Like I don't even think that's what the chapter that earlier section was intending, but I don't think they followed through with what they intended. Anyways.
Well, if they're going to claim to avoid it, then
well, no, they want to make it more than just. Anyway, it doesn't matter what they said because they didn't do it. But
yeah, it just felt like low-hanging fruit that was unplucked.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so the next section, Australia into the dream time. Can you summarize the dream time here?
I recently was actually in Australia and had opportunities to see a couple Aboriginal performances that were really quite cool. And in one of them, one of the performers kind of talked a little bit about it. I mean, was very open about like, we're going to explain it to you white people. And it was actually instructive, like kind of talking about it sort of in the same terms here, in the sense of it being a living tradition that is simultaneously the land and the law and the stories, like all of these things that seem like they should be separable, not being separable, I think is like the key to grokking it.
Mm-hmm. But before we get, I guess, trying to explain what the dream time is, this section contrasts the dream time versus the dreaming.
Yes.
And by dreaming, I think they mean like an Arcadian dreaming or some Tuatha dreaming. And these are very different metaphysics, not completely separate, but there's differences, right? The weird thing is, first of all, they talk about like, okay, the dream time was its own thing, and then, Captain Cook comes in and colonialism, and then they set up little, when they were setting up colonies and stuff, that area would sort of get like reformatted, changed to be like the Tuathan dream, but the areas around it were still the dream time, but as things... So just having read the South America chapter, it's really strange that South America doesn't have anything like that.
Or indeed anywhere else that we've seen in the...
Yeah, like maybe the Nunihi and the Menehune had something vaguely like that. But then why didn't South America? But anyway, sorry. Continue.
Well, I don't know that we've seen any evidence for the Nunye or Menehune having that either, but I do think that delineating them is an interesting idea. I was curious as I started reading this about how it would align with what we've seen in Mage or not, what
Yeah.
mechanics we would get for their interaction, what distinguishes the spirit beings, what constitutes glamour and banality, and what the shattering was like.
Hmm.
Spoiler, we don't get answers to any of that,
Yeah.
but
In fact, this chap, like what this section's even for, like we get later on, we'll get to the kiths, or I don't know if kith would be the right word for these.
mm,
Um, but mechanically, we get the same level of detail that you'd get for other kiths, right? But like, there's definitely not enough information to play any of this.
no, no, of course not.
Like, not even the brief bits in the other sections.
It feels like here's our ideas, you figure it out.
Yeah, it's like this is strange, and it explicitly says at ports that like, you know, you're not going to be able to make sense of it in this amount. I'm like, then you can't use it in a game. What?
Well, or if you do, then you're kind of raising the cringiness of, oh, they're different
Yeah,
and inscrutable, which is like,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, credit where credit's due. They do get deep into the history here, which I think is
yeah,
important.
yeah. Which does completely just their thing they said before about not wanting to get into like like this is all about trauma and the response to it. Like that's this section.
Which makes me wonder what its goal was to the players. Like,
Yeah,
what did you want the player reading this to get out of it? I'm not
it felt
clear.
like this was written by like a very guilt-ridden white Australian. Like that's
Which might be the case, but translating that into
yeah,
approaches to playing Changeling is a tall order, I
yeah.
would say. But we get plenty of notes about how the Kithane history unfolded. Side question to that, were there really active duchies in the late 1700s? Because they're like, oh, representatives from the Duchy of whatever. And I don't
Yeah.
know. I just felt like during the interregnum, that kind of feudalistic system was not
We did.
so.
There were noble commoners, and now in C20, there's like more of the autumn she too around. But yeah, they made it sound more like they were just Arcadian.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that it was as robust as it is in the modern times, which I would
it's not
dispute.
what it presents. Yeah,
And also, how were Kithane not undone by the voyages to Australia? Because those were some bleak voyages.
like if some were born there in Australia, that could. But
I don't know. They make it sound like they arrived
yeah,
as convicts, like colonists and
yeah, that's
convicts.
a lot of ravaging
Yeah, I guess so.
of your fellow convicts. That's
There are a lot of redcaps and
yeah,
Cluricon and Pooka and merfolk and
yeah.
selkies and trolls in the
Wait,
outback.
merfolk are now Kithane?
I don't know if they're Kithane, but they're around
Yeah,
apparently.
yeah.
So in this section, we get the Kithane geography, the
Hmm.
colonial geography of the Fae. So we have the Duchy of the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, centered on the remote New Albion freehold. The earliest Kithane's dazzlement at the dream time there grew into the first conflicts with the spirit beings. And we get a little rehash of the history from the Fae perspective. But now the commoners and their Fiona leader are seeking reconciliation.
Hmm.
I don't know that I needed like the unifying there's a rising darkness angle to like give that
Yeah.
urgency, but whatever.
And it was also weird to say like the spirit beings have no concept of what this is. Like that
Yeah,
felt like
insulting.
yeah, they're supposed to be like very wise and mysterious and whatever, but they don't know what this is. Like I don't know indigenous Australian culture, but does none of it have the concept of bad things?
Yeah.
Like no part of it?
And how as a storyteller are you supposed to present that in your game, even if you're just using these spirit beings as storyteller characters? Because it's like, well,
Yeah.
we've been here 60,000 years, but we just can't figure this out.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, then we get the Duchy of the Winding River in Queensland. It started when some aggressively expansionistic Kithane, led by a cruel redcap named Bonebiter in the early days, was abetted by the government and had a reign of terror that spawned a dark dreaming until he was overthrown.
Hmm.
The scars have not fully healed, but the Kithane spirit being relations have somewhat mended. Good for them. Then the Duchy of Gold in Victoria. There's the Gold Rush history, more labor than wealth because the gold was not very plentiful. Originally ruled by, surprise, a knocker duchess who found everybody at odds when she got there. The Cathane with the spirit beings, the human miners with the government. She won peace between them and earned a lot more respect than most Cathane did with the spirit beings. Then, in the Resurgence, the Gwydion came back and just trashed it all.
Yep.
That one I think is probably the most interesting to me because the conflict is localized within the Cathane community about their relationship with where they have colonized. It's like, you were doing it, if not right, at least better than the rest of your fellows who had just arrived.
Yeah.
And now these newcomers have come and ruined everything, and you have to fix it. That I think I could work with if I were running a game.
Yeah, and this makes a little bit more sense to me than some of the she Ninahi connections they have sometimes have in
yeah, for
240.
example.
Yeah.
The last duchy founded was that of the Swan in Western Australia, named after the Swan River colony, presumably. It had poor soil, which hampered growth, which meant less contact between the Cathane and the spirit beings. But when the Cathane did finally arrive, they made a point to do better than their fellows back east. The Bogan-founded Carolan dynasty and its practical diplomacy survived through the Arcadian return.
Yeah, and they dealt with the Arcadians who tried to take over.
They suffer no fools, no pointy-eared drama queens. And then we have the land of the Rainbow Serpent, which is the Northern Territory and South Australia, with basically no Cathane.
Yeah, this is sort of for people who have, it's the middle bit of Australia for people who.
So I guess the city of Adelaide with 1.5 million, mostly European people, just doesn't matter. But
well, from my understanding from talking to other Australians, both not in and not in Adelaide, that is the standard Australian approach to Adelaide. So,
this is also where Uluru would be. So missed opportunity there to.
Yeah, which was already it was in Book of Freeholds.
Yeah, it's a Book of Freeholds. Yeah, but we're told the dreaming bleeds into the dream time here. So cool.
Then we get Tasmania, where they just kind of.
Yeah, it's bleak. But I mean,
yeah,
Tasmania's history is really bleak. So.
And the Torres Strait.
I think that the authors thought the Torres Strait and its islands are like much larger and populous than they actually are. They're diverse.
Yeah,
but
I don't know why it was left in here because it didn't really put anything in it.
Yeah, it's just what is it, 2 sentences?
Yeah, and those cultures, so those are people that are not the indigenous peoples of Australia at all, but they have had cultural contact with them, which, first of all, this chapter makes it seem like the indigenous Australians had no cultural contact outside of Australia, which is not true. And
I think just what throws me is a number of European Cathane have managed to carve out bits of territory, and we're talking about like islands that are smaller collectively than New York City with 4,000 people.
Yeah, what's the pop? Yeah, I know, but it's just that this is the group of people that did interact with Australia before the Europeans showed up, but like that's not. They didn't seem to know that when they wrote this, and
yeah, all of these divisions are, of course, European impositions, and the way in which the spirit beings divide their land are not mentioned at all.
But I also like the whole concept of spirit being like they never encountered. Like it says they never encountered anything. Like they did.
Yeah.
And then they say that the spirit beings are in the Torres Strait. I'm like, but that's a different culture.
Yeah.
It's like when they put the Inuit as part of the Nuni. I don't like it.
Anyway, then the dreaming.
Yeah, the dreaming. And this is talking about what the dreaming is in like the Cathane dreaming, basically.
Yeah. I do like their use of the verb papering over the dream time in accordance with Cathane expectations.
Yeah.
But we just don't get any information on what the dream time is like, you know?
Yeah. Well, we get a little bit.
Not
in the
not
next
much.
little bit, the song lines. Yeah.
I think the song lines are how it operates. It doesn't tell you. It's like we don't get those sidebars about here's what the dreaming feels like in these places that we did in the previous sections.
Yeah. And then we get the dream time and the Dantean, which
that was weird.
I think this is good explanation. This is another good argument for why c20 Dantean are a terrible idea. We should not use them.
I don't think this was written with them in mind. I mean,
really?
Well, it kind of reads to me like in the same incarnation, someone goes into the outback and then comes back broken.
Yeah.
Rather than in their next incarnation, which is how a c20 Dantean would be.
Oh, I thought c20 Dantean could become Dantean the same incarnation.
I don't know. The core book says some Fae awaken wrong. And it's just kind of the implication that I get out of the Dantean write-up in the c20 core book is that it's on their.
Okay, maybe this is a third kind of bad Dantean. The third kind of Dantean that's neither Autumn People nor C20
I mean,
core.
I'm fine with Dantean being broken
Uh,
mid incarnation like that.
yeah, that's
Bring
fine.
that
But the
back.
way that they talk about this is like,
Yeah,
so we get song lines, which says
they are
there's,
not trods.
but they think they are, and then they get screwed up.
Yes.
And it just seems like, okay, the only way I can think about this, they didn't really describe what the Dreamtime is enough to use it in a game of Kithane PCs even. But it does read, it reminds me of in Dreams of Nightmares when they talked about mages in the dreaming.
Mm, kind of,
They
yeah.
just don't know the rules. I think that's what they're going with, but it would help to have enough information about the rules for the storyteller to present it.
There's actually a lot more rules about it in Dead Magic 2 for Mage, because the Dreamtime is a mage thing in there,
Oh,
so because you have
okay.
shallowings.
Does it match up with what's in here?
I don't think there's enough data here to say one way or
Uh,
the other. The way it's
is it
presented,
consistent with it?
sure, it's a
Yeah.
giant shallow realm that is semi-sentient, kind of like the Dreaming. So, yeah. I do like the note on how the Kithane worry that they are spreading banality with their dreaming. I think that's a good note for the setting. Make of it what you will.
Yeah.
And then the metaphysics of spirit beings. They are descended from the ancestor beings, but they seem to
But
be
not descended from the ancestor beings?
they inherit their role from the ancestor
They're
beings.
like the dreams of the ancestor beings? That's what I.
Something like that. I don't know. I think it's okay to call them descendants,
Yeah.
but they are hypothesized to be the caretakers of this last pre-shattering dreaming, if indeed that's what the dream time is.
Well, it's not just pre shattering dreaming, it'd be pre sundering dreaming, wouldn't it?
Perhaps, depending on how you want to define the sundering.
Yeah.
They have a superficial resemblance to other Fae. They can use arts and realms. They can have a nature affinity in their home country, and they regain glamour through their song lines. Country has a very particular meaning in this context as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's unclear how you really play one. So
Yeah. Even as an NPC, it's not really.
yeah. And as much as I like the glamour ways section in these write ups, there's actually no content in them for these.
Yeah. This is just not enough information to use it.
Nope.
But it's a lot of information, just not enough.
Yeah.
And then so we get a new altered background country, which is basically just Glade, but has some extra effects. The Dreamtime reckons a spirit being to the land. Well, in it, you get use the nature realm instead of whatever your normal realm is. And anyone who trespasses or transgresses against spirit beings in her country suffers the same penalties as breaking the law of the Ashit as the country's dot rating. Um, what are the penalties for breaking the Ashit?
Great question.
This is the first I've heard of there being penalties with a dot
Yeah,
rating.
quantifiable sheet breaking.
Like last time I checked, breaking the sheet just means changelings will be mad at you if they find out.
Well, now you get a 3-dot penalty. I think it might be something like with Book of Freeholds. There's the thing about transgressing within a freehold imposes a penalty equal to something about the level of the freehold, and maybe that's what they're
Yeah.
going for. But yeah, it's not clear at all here.
Yep. And then we get the first kith. Can you say the name?
I'm gonna try. Lorcan.
That was a very Welsh take on it.
Yeah, probably. I do my best. These are bat shifter sorcerers with fluid gender.
Yeah.
Freelance wish merchants willing to deal with Kithane. They used to take mortal bondmates for epiphany-ish purposes. And again, 3 birthrights, 2 frailties. It's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, they're neat.
They're neat.
Can't talk about the cultural aspect of them at all, but
So
cool.
the source lore is malignant spirits from the Northern Territory who eat poisonous snakes and live in dry forests.
Yeah, that's not this.
There are some bat associations,
Uh,
but all of them feel very generic, I have to say.
yeah.
So,
What is this? The Mimis are the most Fey-like? Like, what is that supposed to mean? But the other ones still seem like Fey-like to me. I don't know what
yeah.
you're talking about.
This is another one where it seems like the source lore was fairies. Like that's
Yeah.
it.
Like, well, the fact they're supposed to be like super tall and skinny, and their frailty gives them a bonus, by the way, that they could fit into cracks.
Oh yeah.
And I do not understand the Muse of the Land birthright.
I don't either. I wrote in my notes, they muse the land. I'm not entirely clear on this because
Or, well, they're in their land. Can they muse dreamers? Is that what it's saying? I don't know.
I thought they specifically could not muse dreamers. I thought that was a thing.
But I thought maybe they could with their
Ah, I see.
birthright.
Yeah, I mean, we get the note on page 110 that spirit beings may not regain glamour in Cthulhu freeholds or by the usual methods such as musing and ravaging.
Yeah.
So,
But does this mean when their birthright is they can muse under this limited situation? I don't know. Or does it mean they muse the land, in which case they're like, I'm just picturing the rule. It's like you're rolling. Okay, so you've got to figure out if the land, like, what's the banality rating of the land, and then you're like rolling your thing to try to figure out how to help it. And maybe you can help it with its artwork, or you're going to make it help volunteer.
well, it says they have to be engaged in, landscaping or natural conservation or
Yeah,
area cleanup. So is it like you have to be working with a human who's doing that or
yeah.
shrug?
But yeah, also their frailty gives them a nice little birthright. Um,
Then the Rainmakers, who, despite insisting that they are not rainbow serpents, they are inspired by the many, many rainbow serpent myths.
yep.
They are snake shifters, protectors of glades and songlines, often solitary, keepers of the law, some traditional, others not. This is very generic, and you can do basically anything you want with them.
Yep.
They make rain. The whole like grammatical construction of many are thing one, others are thing
Yep.
two, that doesn't help at all, and it comes up so
Well,
often.
we know these ones aren't the rainbow serpent because the next ones are the rainbow serpent.
No, the next ones are the daughters born of the rainbow serpent.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they protect the waters and those who dwell there.
And they turn to a crocodile.
Yes. Well, they can also take like mermaid shapes in water, which,
Yeah.
from what I could tell from looking about the lore, is also pretty accurate. Just not a lot of depth, though. Like,
I think there's something. It says something. I'm not sure what. I have guesses, but it says something that so many of these kiths are animal shapeshifters.
well, it's a common mytheme.
Yeah, but way more than what we got in other kiths. But anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they're just not very distinctive. Like, I mean, when we've talked about creating kiths,
Yeah.
that I think is one of the key things. For all the flaws of what we saw in the previous two sections, at least some of them had like really specific, fleshed out ideas of who they are. And these,
Yep.
it's hard for me to
Well,
like.
these even generic, like they say at the beginning, spirit beings have distinct differences. These aren't really kiths. These are more like categories of kiths.
I guess so.
I think they're supposed to be more like the lost. What was it called again? Not their kith, because their kith's like
Seemings.
different. They're seemings. Yeah.
That's not confusing. Oh yeah, do these have seemings at all? I guess not.
I don't know. Yeah, some of them talk about seemings, some of them don't.
Yeah.
Some kiths right up.
So with the section overall, I like the existential challenges as concepts. I just wish we had more. I think asymmetry of presentation is not the way to make it work in a game. Like the most we get for the Kithane side of things is like colonial historical shame, and then what we get on the spirit being side is insufficient mechanics. So,
and well, not insufficient mechanics, insufficient
detail.
anything.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to play this. Like what?
Yeah. Last but not least,
We get.
well, maybe least given the.
I don't know. Okay, the Fertile Crescent, which covers 3 areas ranging from Arabia to the Fertile Crescent, which they call the Caucasus, which is an entirely different place, that not part of the Fertile Crescent. Slash, I just need to get that out.
I think it's supposed to extend a lot farther because.
No, they describe what it extends into, and it.
Yeah, it's big. Well, before we get there.
Yeah.
So we start with some deep Babylonian history.
Okay, what is it with White Wolf writers? This is not like Dead Magic, one of the Dead Magic books. There's other things. Like they thought that the Sumerians were really evil. I don't get it. Like it was so they're always like really dark how they present it, way more so than like other. Is it because they're gone now, so they feel like they can dunk on them hard? Or, I don't know.
I think maybe they don't realize how much they're playing into kind of like Christian ideas, like calling Babylon the center of demons and everything. Like,
well, even by Babylon, it would have been like Inanna and stuff. But
yeah, but I think they're just mashing it all together. The whole Babylonian demon worshiper trope.
So it was ruled by Fomorians,
right? And Inanna is a fae now. apparently.
Sure. I mean, these are all these prehistory things. Like, you don't.
Yeah. There's a reference to the Great Unleashing taking place, which it's like that Dark Ages Fae tie-in we saw in the C20 core book, but apparently it takes place well after the rise of civilization here. So,
But no, this was before writing, though.
well, Sumerians invented it, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it says on page 114, Inanna, she introduced written language, blah, 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 in the aftermath of the Great Unleashing. So,
Oh,
like,
I thought. I thought. Yeah, she introduced it in the aftermath of the Great Unleashing,
it seems like she
right?
introduced the written language first, but
Oh, okay. So 3100 BC is when she would have introduced it.
it says she went into the ziggurat, fought Ereshkigal, came out with her tablets of fate, met with the Inanime. Incidentally, having an anime of rivers, barley, and clay is really cool. I do like that.
Yeah.
So she shared these secrets with mortal dreamers so they would become strong enough to drive back the Elder Dark. And
Yeah.
then the aftermath of the Great Unleashing, the surviving Fomorians retreated to lick their wounds. This is recharacterizing what the Great Unleashing is, maybe,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. They don't say what the Great Unleashing is. They don't talk about the Great Unleashing anywhere else in C20.
they do in
Do
the core
they?
book.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Yeah.
But they said like the civilization thing was way before Nana. Just it was like they're like ziggurats and stuff before they had writing.
Yeah. Well, the whole period of that history, I think, is a little bit
Yeah.
unclear, but
Yeah, and then the artwork's just a big mishmash of things.
yeah. These are the Kiths, right? This is them. I've been told, incidentally, with regards to this sidebar on page 115, that Jinn is not a great parallel for Kithane as a term, and
Yeah.
that at least in Ottoman/Persian historical areas, Peri would be more accurate and less religiously and metaphysically
Yeah.
fraught. I don't know, but
I have an even bigger problem with the sidebar.
what's up?
It only makes any sense if you're talking about writing things in English.
Yeah, I guess that's true, doesn't
Like, how do you do your capitalization difference in Arabic or whatever? Yeah.
it? I mean, I guess it's the game book referring to itself as a game book, qua game book.
Yeah, but it's talking about how the people there use it. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Let me just figure out what the. Oh, no, it does cover the Caucasus. This is a very. Okay, so the Empire of the
Yeah, let's
Caucasus.
talk about these.
Okay, so it says.
But
Yeah.
before we even get there, I just have to point out we race through history at probably the most breakneck pace
Yeah.
I've seen in any of these books because we get like Christianity and Islam, Crusades, Ottoman Empire, fall of the Ottoman Empire.
Also, it's a super pro Christianity and Islam take for a changeling book.
Kind of, yeah. But it's all within like 3 paragraphs.
Yep. Okay. Emperor of the Caucasus lands in westernmost Turkey, southeast through Iraq and Iran, so Mesopotamia, and northeast through Kazakhstan.
Yeah, it's the Achaemenid Empire.
Okay, so that does include the Caucasus, I guess, along with Mesopotamia and maybe Syria. And
Yeah, but also like Afghanistan and Pakistan, and like, if you're following the footprint of that empire, Iran and
oh yeah,
Turkmenistan.
yeah, roughly following. So yeah, I don't think it's including.
Yeah, it's an odd
I
name
think it's only
for
going up.
sure.
Well, okay, it has to go through Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, or else because you can't get to Kazakhstan.
Yeah,
But does it include Azerbaijan and Georgia? And
I'd have to look at a map of the Achaemenid Empire, but
I'm just looking at yeah, okay, but it says roughly too. So
that's true.
Yeah, but anyway, so maybe it has the Caucasus in it, maybe not.
Yeah. So it was recently united by Karim and Anahid, who are in Ifrit and Ishu, the latter more than she seems, with their sort of 1001 Nights vibe court in Mosul.
Yeah.
Most Fae keep to cities where their oddities are easier to conceal, and conceal they do because they must.
Well, I just want to ask one thing about the previous section on Australia.
Hmm.
It never, or the other sections, they never talk about Concordia, did they?
Nope.
Okay, let's just continue.
Yep.
That's important.
It is. Yes, because apparently Emperor Karim admired David's candor and allied with him.
Yeah, shortly after turn of Arcadian Shi and Concordia, the ruling Shi turned their eyes towards the Caucasus. So this would have been like early 1970s
Soviet Union.
American imperialism in the Middle East. Is that what they're talking about? Or what?
Maybe it's like the war in Afghanistan. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like this is the bit that makes it seem like Concordia is the all Shi around the world, but
Well, as we saw in chapter 1, Concordia
Yeah.
maybe means more than Concordia. Anyway.
Yeah.
I do like the note about the local dreaming being filled with ribbons of text and a ziggurat.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
This feels like somebody read like their grade 9 history book.
Or just vaguely remembered that book rather than read it.
Yeah. It's like, why throw in the she houses here? Like, what?
I guess because it's the closest to Europe out of all of them. I don't know.
Yeah.
It has the most Indo-European connection.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we get the Caliphate of Cedars, which is the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel,
Yeah.
ruled by Caliph Mahbub the Dove Pooka, who won the position by being kind to the previous ruler as he went through the undoing. This is another, like, mainly it's about the character.
Yeah. And he's in Damascus. When was the Syrian Civil War?
Before this was written, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we learn about how some Jinn don't want to abandon this area because of its long history, and others are drawn to the bloodshed there. So they are actually directly talking about, at the time, contemporary events.
Yeah, but I'm not sure which contemporary. No, the Civil War started in 2011.
Yeah, I mean, this was very much in the thick of it.
During it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also
lumping together a lot of places which probably should be individually
it's
handled.
like even more ridiculous than a lot of their other lumping.
Yeah. But we get the note that the local dreaming is a crumbling hodgepodge of civilizations over a tranquil sea.
Yep.
Lastly, we get the Sultanate of Hejaz, Arabia, ruled by a Sunni Muslim Lilin named Sultana Talitha from her Oasis freehold. And she asked to join Leonin. Who does that?
Yeah, that's just what? Yeah, that's way too much focuses on just Saudi Arabia with like the entire Arabian Peninsula supposed to be there. Number of different cultures. I guess. And then we get the Jinn of Al Halal.
And they are just mixing religion and culture and folklore left and right throughout this whole section, aren't they?
So we get the Ifrit.
Yes.
All the stuff this is based on, for most of them, I don't know enough about the. I know I've seen them like in pop culture stuff, but I don't know enough about the folklore. From the folklore standpoint, I don't really know much about most of these.
Folklorically, they're just like demons. They're demons in Arabic culture. They don't appear in pre-Islamic texts. I read, so I don't know if they are a more recent creation out of religion.
Yeah.
But in this context, they're presented as being born from the dreams of the righteous anger and power to survive violence. Mm-hmm. They prefer to lead others and have a commanding presence. They glow with fiery glamour. They seek purpose and status. They like to prove their mettle. And I kind of liked the seemings being associated with battle for childlings, tactics for wilders, and strategy for grumps. It's a little bit one note, but I like it. Mm-hmm. One chord that is made of 3 notes.
The realm affinity seems a bit off.
Yeah, I guess because fire?
Yeah, nature.
Yeah.
Then we get the Lilin, which...
Yes.
It feels like it accidentally hit some folklore things, like very long gone folklore that there's writing about.
I think the owl reference is like actually accurate. Yeah. But I know that friend of the show, Charles Siegel, has had plenty of things to say about this kith, and they're more connected with a very specific White Wolf interpretation of Lilith than...
Although there was originally Lilith demons.
Yeah, the Screech
It's
Owls.
like a category of demons. Yeah, and then that eventually sort of got turned into the whole... So this does seem to harken back to the earlier, which is not a modern folklore, but like it's not...
Yeah.
Hasn't been followed by anyone for like probably at least 1,500 years, maybe longer. So, but...
Yeah.
We at least have some writing alluding to it. So,
yeah, they're presented as headstrong hedonists, gender fluid, sensual, freedom-loving, nocturnal, and restless.
Yeah,
nifty birthright.
Yeah, they need a frailty about forcing them to get divorced, though. That would be...
Yeah. So then, the one that is probably the least like its source material is the Qareen.
Aww.
So
I like them.
I know I like them too, but they have nothing to do. Basically, in the lore, they're doppelgangers. They're like your spirit double. And
so just change their name to something else, and you're fine.
Yes, here they are, the walking libraries with partially eidetic memory that they can telepathically share.
Yeah,
they can't lie, so they're seen as both trustworthy and treacherous. because reasons. They're good at tasks that require mental precision, and they're modest and loyal, but frail looking and elderly seeming, despite being actually like eternal.
Yep. They seem like mummy crossover kind.
Yeah.
I actually misremembered and thought like these kiths were from the Egypt section.
Ah, some overlap maybe.
Yep.
Lastly, we get the Shaitan source
Not
reference.
quite lastly. We get a
Oh,
sidebar
that's true.
on the ghouls,
Yeah.
which talk about not enough information. Like I think this should have either left the sideboard out or make an actual proper kith write up for them as Thalane.
They're also in the Bygone Bestiary, I think. So,
Okay.
but yeah, basically ghasts, but extra flesh eatery. Then, actually, lastly, we get the Shaitan, who are tempters, almost always unseelie, but not Thalane.
Yeah.
Born of anxious dreams by those who feel trapped by their community and their secret desires, which feels like a commentary.
So is this so what folklore is this based on, Pooka?
Oh, I can't imagine. Yeah, I mean, pretty straightforward. They're sneaks and bad influences, and
I kind of like these two potentially.
yeah,
Like these are all kiths I could. There's definitely problems with all this, but all the actual kith write-ups we got are ones that like I could see fixing up a bit and using as NPCs or something in a game. And there's a lot of the other ones too I could see doing that.
this is also. I know that I talk a lot about redemption arcs for Thalane,
Yeah.
but there's a note in here. I forget which sentence it is, but it says it is up to them, the Shaitan, to decide how they will act on their villainous feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like they want you to play into that as a player.
I do think because like going with the Jin thing also means like they have two fire associated kiths, and that was a bit confusing.
Hmm.
They could have just not done that.
Yeah. So with this section overall, I mean, the allusions to colonialism rather than spelling it out kind of fell flat for me, especially for such a
Oh.
rich history region. And it's quite short. Like, it's certainly the shortest of these 4 sections.
Talking about colonialism, they're way too pro-Ottoman.
Yeah.
How colonialist power that was.
For sure.
And plus the whole... This is an area of empires invading and taking over and doing terrible things to the populations of the people living there. Like, not the entire area, but there's chunks of it that's a lot of the history to a lot of people. So...
It's also weird that this is literally the part of the world with the longest recorded history in terms of writing.
Yeah.
And the wide swaths of territory that are included have their complexity completely flattened.
Yeah.
Islam gets like 2 mentions in the whole thing. So,
it's a weird way of breaking it down, too.
Yeah.
Like, they sat there, they looked at where the actual continental official, quote unquote, official continent lines are and just did that.
I wonder if it was almost like, how much can we get away with including here?
Yeah.
You
like,
know?
Not just Egypt through Mesopotamia, there's definitely been a lot of things, but like Ethiopia and Somalia and Yemen and Saudi,
Yeah.
like, there's huge history there, too, of interconnection. But they don't even, like, if you didn't look at a map, you wouldn't even know these from reading this, like, they were even anywhere near each other.
Well, so in this section in particular, there's 0 information about the human cultures.
Yeah.
But it's a running issue through all of these, which kind of, to put a bow on this a little bit, it returns me to my initial kind of metric for assessment. What and who is this for? And I think my answer is, it's for filling your game with lightly described kiths that you don't have to think too much about, for people who want like a fig leaf of cultural breadth in the game.
But,
you know?
But it also is terrible for that. Like, so many things in this chapter have to stay there. This is like you'd have to be globetrotting,
Yeah.
but not... That's the worst. Like,
I'm saying that's what it's for, not even how well they did that.
Yeah. I don't know if it would have been the best idea, but like with this word count, it almost might have made more sense to be like, okay, so you're running a Concordia game, and there's people from these cultures in your area. Like, here's how to represent like kiths from these cultures in New York City or something, or Atlanta or whatever.
Hey, no, New York City, working on it.
Yeah, but that's almost what they could. It doesn't have to be a specific place, or London, or Toronto, or Ottawa. Like, showing like, okay, so you have people from here, you have changelings from here. You know, we don't have the word count to talk about how to actually run a game in Egypt or Somalia or, you know,
right.
Brazil. How can you have like Brazilian Fae in London? Like, they could at least do that.
in connection with the possibility of material repurposed from Keys to the Kingdom, I actually don't know how much was, because I don't think much of that
Yeah.
filtered through into this.
Hmm.
But the way it's presented lends itself to a globe-trotting game of Concordian Kithane, as long as you're using the very specific story hooks that they dangle for you. Like, there's
Yeah.
enough for you to have a scene where you meet one of these emperors or whatever, who can basically give you that political description that they have, and you can reference, oh, here's this kith you've never seen before, and you want to show
Yeah.
off one of their birthrights. Like, that's about as far as you can go. That doesn't really give you a compelling story, and certainly doesn't give you a story that's well grounded in these
Hmm.
territories.
It
Like,
doesn't give you what I'd actually want is I have players from these cultures and they
right.
don't want to have to play someone from European folklore. Definitely doesn't give that.
And I think you and I, and probably a significant number of fans, are willing to do the heavy lifting to kind of like
Yeah.
make it work and flesh it out. But I think we're in the minority with that.
Well, and you're talking about like not enough on the human culture. Like this was published in the era of Wikipedia. Like they could
Right.
have. It didn't feel like it was designed to tie into the storyteller doing their own research very well.
Yeah.
Like we're limited word count. We can't put in everything. But here's the Fey bits and how it connects to real world things, and you have to look up the real world things yourself. Like that could have. But they don't even do that. They do like long descriptions of like, yeah, somebody's freehold. Like you've got limited word count. Don't put it towards that. That's
Yeah. And there are a few interesting ideas. Like I said, I think the metaphysical conflict between the dreaming and the dream time stands out to me.
yeah,
But most of the chapter's text kind of fell into the very trap they were so insistent on avoiding, because they glossed over the vast historical and cultural diversity
yeah,
of these continents to create uninspiring kiths not really tied to their lore, without giving them enough definition to make them necessary in a game, except as like
yeah,
flavor. And that feels like tokenism and kith bloat to me to do that.
yeah.
So it's a very lackluster approach. But like, how would you have done it differently, do you think? I mean, since we're talking about
Hmm.
how this didn't work.
Well, like okay, assuming I'm limited to this many pages
Yeah. Ish.
ish.
Because it is 54 pages. That's not insignificant.
Okay, first of all, I wouldn't have made all these kingdoms. Like I would have first of all geographically covered much smaller areas.
Okay.
So like you would have cut out a lot of what's in here. So it's like four places, right?
Hmm.
I would have like covered four. Like I would not have done these multiple spanning kingdom things or whatever. I'm not saying I would have necessarily picked these specific places either, but like I would have focused more on just one kingdom. If you're gonna have that many kiths for that kingdom, okay, do that, and then list a few possible others without actually getting into details about them.
Hmm.
And yeah, a lot more careful with my word count. And
As much as I loved those little dreaming description sidebars, they weren't necessary and took up a lot of room. So,
yeah, but there's the like personal histories of specific NPCs. There
right.
was a lot of that.
How many of those do you think were actually characters from people's games?
I don't know, but that
Yeah. I think for me, it's interesting because I would have done it very differently, probably.
hmm
I think I would have made a much more robust version of the kith construction kit that kind of attends to those questions I was saying I want players to kind of think about, and that encourages people to get at the complexity of these myths with those
yeah.
caveats. Then like notes about those regions that address their history much more in depth with a few political details, and then
Yeah.
the kiths just kind of lightly described. Like, I wouldn't even give them birthrights and frailties. I would say, go do the research, use this robust construction kit to create the birthrights and frailties that work for your game.
Mm,
I would also say to people, consider how they fit in with Changeling as a game. Like, how do they integrate with humanity? At the same time, how do you maintain fidelity to the myths, you know?
hmm
And while, I mean, obviously you should always try to get as much input as possible from knowledgeable sources, like we said at the beginning, you have to let tables hash out for themselves whether those ideas need development from themselves on the basis
Yeah.
of the stories they want to tell. So, like, give them the tools to properly do that research, integrate it into the game, maybe throw in a couple examples or like one example for each region, but not like five kiths that I can't work with and a description of the region that doesn't do anything for
Mm.
me. I also would have included India and Southeast Asia, but you know.
Well, if I was limited to this, I wouldn't have tried to expand it more.
If I had to break down the page count for everything I just said, I probably would have had like 10 pages on just the process of doing this. Maybe not 10. Maybe you could get by with like 7 or 8. And then like 8 pages each just talking about the history of these places, maybe a paragraph on each of a few domains.
Yeah. Those absolutely could not be in a player's guide. That's beyond.
Oh, well, ideally it would be its own book,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, each kingdom here would be its own book.
I think they showed too much of an end product here. That's kind of my complaint.
I would show more of an end product, but make it usable, and maybe show less places then by doing that.
Well, then we should each go in our separate directions and then put them together
Yes.
into a book.
So. Yeah, but also we're not limited to one chapter of
of
a
course.
player's guide. Yeah.
But like that's what I mean though. To me the process is what matters, and I think that it matters to them too, but they didn't actually put it in here.
Yeah.
So
I also would have done way better art direction.
Well, there's that.
Oh, also, if you're going to do kiths like this, maybe put a picture of the kith with the kith instead of like at the end a big thing and then you're like, which one is this? Like you look at a big bunch of them and you're like trying to figure out which. I didn't like that. I wanted to see the kith with the kith.
But they did that in the core book too. I mean,
yeah.
Anyway, we have a couple comments from listeners. A storyteller says, I think them choosing to have the Fomorians be called that in the Middle East background setting is interesting, but it kind of surprises me then they don't bring them up much for the others. No kidding.
Oh, the other thing we would both do is more consistency between sections.
Yeah. Which I think would be easier for my approach, but
yes.
And then also Yorubi first asks or says, I have a bone to pick with the Biloco, and I think kind of all of his complaints are what we said. But then a question, I get that by the time the player's guide was being made, the writing was already on the proverbial wall for the 20th editions, but is it really better to have a token, quote, cultural kith than to represent an actual culture's stories?
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
I think it would have been actually better to simply not have the Biloco, delete it, and then not use that text.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that necessarily about all the other kiths, but definitely.
And for sure, it's a difficult balance to strike between accurate representation and a playable kith, but I feel like you can err on the side of if you design it, they will play it, or at least like.
But I don't think they did that for either for this. Like the Biloco are still like they're not actually that playable in their concept. Oh, who are you? You're the grumpy person that stays in your local area and doesn't want to talk to outsiders. That's not a playable kith concept, really.
Well, I think if someone is genuine enough in their desire for having accurate lore represented, they're probably more willing to put up with, mechanically at least, weirdness.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean...
But also the Biloco, you can take any of these other kiths, or for that matter, any kith that's a changeling, like an actual proper changeling in a human culture, and just do the Biloco as like their personality trait. Like
legacy.
Yeah, it's just a legacy.
Yeah. I'm also fine with different families of Fae having different mechanics, but spirit beings were kind of a mess.
Well, yeah, if you're going to do different mechanics, it has to have enough information on doing it.
You don't need to go full Xian, but...
No. Okay, the Xian problem is...
Yeah.
A problem with it is they're not... Like, the spirit beings have way more in common with the Kithane than the Xian do.
Yeah. In any case, I do think representing the actual stories is more important than the tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of representation, I made like a tiny list, and if people listening kind of want to find contemporary, literary, whatever takes on some of the lore for African lore, I highly recommend Nidio Korafor's Who Fears Death and Marlon James' Black Leopard Red Wolf and its sequel Moon Witch Spider King. Latin America, I mean, there's Miguel Angel Asturias, who is from, I think, Guatemala, so not quite covered by Beratiera here, but also you have like the magical realism tradition. For Australia, The awkward thing is that one of the most famous people who actually did have to read in college is B. Wongar, who's a Serbian immigrant to Australia and has kind of been lambasted and praised by different groups for like his depictions of Aboriginal lore. I assume there's much better stuff out there that I'm not aware of. Honestly, I liked the story in the C20 anthology that we got. I thought that was a good Changeling Australia take.
Yeah, I like that better than.
Yeah. And then for West Asia, the Middle East, I mean, obviously the 1001 Nights, but also I was thinking of like the Orphan Tales by Kat Valenti or the Cairo graphic novel by G. Willow Wilson. Like there's plenty of inspiration out there from the lore in that part of the world. So yeah, it's out there and it's not that hard to find. And it's frustrating that they I don't know what they did, but it seems like they did not draw on many resources they could have.
Yeah, on top of everything else, this feels like a rushed first draft.
And maybe it was because
Yeah.
it was the end, but
Mm-hmm.
and they there was enough clamor that they felt they had to do it, and maybe didn't do it as much justice as they would have liked. But here's what we're left with.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was rough. That was a rough chapter.
Yeah. Yep.
Josh, if other people feel it's a rough chapter, how can they express their opinion?
Well, you can definitely join our Discord, discord.me/CTP. You, I guess, could send us an email saying you agree it's a rough chapter, change the link to the podcast.
Don't send us that email. We know.
Yeah. Send us an email saying, we love this, and then expect nothing else from us. Podcast@changelingpodcast.com. You can send it to changelingpod@dice.camp on Mastodon. You can go to our YouTube page, Changeling the Podcast. You can go to our Patreon, Changeling the Podcast, and if you end up becoming a patron, that definitely helps us. You can also go to our Facebook page, Changeling the Podcast. And of course, everything's on our website, changelingthepodcast.com.
And links to all of the above will be in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain Pooka.
I'm really annoyed that the Australia chapter didn't have like a bogan boggin pun.
Snip, snap, snout, this episode's out.
Our strong opinions about the accuracy of geography, history, and linguistics pale in comparison to our desire to learn more about the Fey foodways from the various locations highlighted in this chapter of the Player's Guide. If you drink matcha through an Alicanto-crafted momia, what cantrips might be worked into the metal? Do the spirit beings harvest witchetty greb chimera and sugarbag dross for their bush tucker? Where in Al-Hilal al-Khasib can we source a tray of glamour-soaked knafa, and more importantly, will they ship internationally? As a reminder, do consider stopping by www.changeling30.com for information about next season's 30th anniversary homebrew project, including, among other books, a planned Changeling cookbook that might help answer these and other important questions on our minds and our stomachs. And as we wrap up this second episode of our Player's Guide trilogy and prepare to review the third and final section, you can also stop by our Discord at www.discord.me/CTP to join the conversation for all things fey and flavorful. Please also consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast and receive a shout-out at the end of each episode, like the following friends of the show: Anarchist, Derek, Dorcadus, Elleris, Eobol, Jason Vines, Oreo, Ross Caboose, Sandchicker, Sija, Terry Robinson, Tricerabeth, and Victor Torre. Many thanks for their support. We also welcome reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, and we hope you'll spread the word about our show to your motley mates around the world. From our microphones to your far-flung ears, pointy or otherwise, we wish you well and encourage you, as always, to keep on dreaming.